Today we're diving deep into the Egyptian Book of the Dead, an ancient and profoundly mysterious collection of funerary texts that has captivated scholars and seekers for thousands of years. Although this sacred manuscript has gained recent popularity thanks to movies like The Mummy and various horror films, its story is much older and infinitely more complex than Hollywood portrayals suggest. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with fellow seekers of ancient wisdom around the world. Known as Pertem Hru, or Coming Forth by Day in ancient Egyptian, the Book of the Dead is humanity's most detailed guide to navigating the afterlife. This collection contains over 200 spells, magic words, and instructions designed to ensure safe passage through the realm of the dead. But here's what most people don't know. This isn't just one book, but an entire library of different versions, each one personally crafted for its owner like a custom-made passport to eternity. The ancient Egyptians spent more money on these scrolls than modern people spend on cars, and they believed that without them, your soul would face horrors beyond imagination. What makes this ancient text so enduringly powerful that even today, archaeologists handle these papyrus scrolls with trembling hands? What secrets does it hold about death, judgment, and rebirth that made pharaohs and peasants alike desperately seek copies? And why have these fragile papyrus scrolls survived when so many other ancient texts have crumbled to dust, as if protected by the very magic they contain? Join us as we uncover all the mysteries and secrets of Egypt's most sacred guide to the afterlife. To truly understand the power of the Book of the Dead, we must first journey back to its ancient origins in the sands of Egypt, where death was not feared but carefully planned for like the most important journey of a lifetime. Before we continue this journey into ancient mysteries, make sure to subscribe to Sigil Sanctum for more explorations of hidden knowledge. The Book of the Dead didn't appear overnight. It evolved from even older funeral texts, beginning with the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom around 2400 BCE, making it one of humanity's oldest religious documents. These sacred words were initially carved directly into the burial chambers of pharaohs like King Unas, whose pyramid at Saqqara contains the earliest known version of these afterlife instructions. The hieroglyphs were carved so deep into the stone that they seem to pulse with life even today, and archaeologists report feeling a strange energy when reading them aloud in the dark chambers. The texts were so powerful that later generations couldn't bear to keep them locked away in royal tombs alone. During the Middle Kingdom, around 2055 BCE, these spells transformed into what scholars call the coffin texts, painted on wooden coffins of nobles and wealthy citizens who demanded their own shot at immortality. These weren't simple painted decorations. The coffin texts were written in a special cursive hieroglyphic script that took scribes years to master, and the paint was mixed with ground-precious stones and gold dust to make the words literally glow in the darkness of the tomb. Nobles would spend fortunes commissioning master scribes from cities like Thebes and Memphis to ensure their coffin texts were perfect because a single mistake could doom their soul forever. But it wasn't until the New Kingdom period, around 1550 BCE, that these texts finally became the papyrus scrolls we recognize today as the Book of the Dead. This transformation happened because papyrus scrolls could be mass-produced, sort of like the ancient world's first bestseller. The most famous surviving copy belongs to a royal scribe named Ani, whose papyrus scroll stretches over 78 feet long and took a team of scribes and artists over 6 months to complete. Every single hieroglyph was painted by hand, and the scroll contains over 3,000 individual pictures and symbols. Another remarkable example is the papyrus of Hunifer, which contains some of the most detailed and colorful illustrations of the afterlife journey ever created, with pictures so vivid that modern comic book artists study them for inspiration. This collection held the highest position in Egyptian spiritual hierarchy. It was literally the difference between eternal destruction and divine transformation. The book was intimately connected to Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who was said to have written the original spells himself using a pen made from a feather of the cosmic bird that laid the egg of creation. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide of the dead, used these very texts to help souls navigate the dangerous underworld, and priests claimed that Anubis would refuse to guide any soul who arrived without their personal copy of the Book of the Dead. Over nearly 1,500 years, thousands of copies were created, with scribes in cities like Thebes and Memphis running what were essentially ancient publishing houses, carefully preserving and copying these life-giving words in workshops that operated day and night. The book became so influential that it shaped Egyptian society's entire relationship with death and the divine. Wealthy Egyptians would begin commissioning their personal Book of the Dead as soon as they reached adulthood, working with scribes to customize the spells based on their occupation, personality, and the specific dangers they feared most in the afterlife. Pharaohs like Ramesses II and Tutankhamun had multiple copies made, with backup scrolls buried in different locations in case tomb robbers destroyed the primary copy. Even common citizens would save their entire lives to afford at least a basic version, and there were payment plans where people could buy their Book of the Dead in installments over several years. The cheapest versions used recycled papyrus and basic black ink, while the most expensive versions for pharaohs used virgin papyrus made from the first papyrus shoots of spring and inks mixed with gold, silver, and ground lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan. The Book of the Dead exists as beautifully hand-painted papyrus scrolls, some extending over 37 feet in length when fully unrolled. Imagine unrolling a scroll longer than a school bus filled with the most detailed artwork ever created. These aren't merely text documents filled with boring instructions. They are artistic masterpieces that took teams of specialist scribes and artists working together for months or even years to complete. The largest known Book of the Dead belongs to a priest named Pinigem and measures an incredible 123 feet long, requiring an entire room just to display it fully. The scribes who created these scrolls were master artists who had trained for decades using brushes made from reed plants cut at specific angles and inks mixed from crushed minerals, charcoal, and even gold dust to create colors so vibrant that they have survived over 3,000 years without fading. The scrolls feature striking imagery that would make modern horror movies jealous while simultaneously being beautiful enough to hang in the world's finest art museums. The deceased is shown standing before Osiris, the green-skinned god of the underworld who sits on a throne made of gold and lapis lazuli, wearing a crown that combines the symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. Osiris holds the crook and flail, symbols of divine authority, and his skin is painted the color of fertile soil to represent rebirth and regeneration. Behind him stand the four sons of Horus, each with a different animal head, holding the canopic jars that contain the deceased's preserved organs. The most famous scenes show the heart-weighing ceremony, where Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, carefully places the dead person's heart on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. The scale itself is painted with incredible detail, showing every counterweight and balance point, because the ancient Egyptians believed that even the smallest inaccuracy in the artwork could affect the actual weighing in the afterlife. If the heart was heavier than the feather, it meant the person had lived a sinful life, and a monster called Ammit would devour their soul forever. Ammit is painted as a terrifying creature with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippo, combining the three most dangerous animals in ancient Egypt into one soul-eating nightmare. The scrolls also contained detailed maps of the afterlife's dangerous passages, showing lakes of fire that souls had to cross using boats made of sunlight, knife-wielding demons that guarded important doorways, and serpents longer than rivers that coiled around the gates to paradise. These maps were drawn with the precision of modern architectural blueprints because the ancient Egyptians believed that getting lost in the afterlife meant wandering forever in darkness. Some scrolls include detailed floor plans of the Hall of Two Truths, where the final judgment takes place, complete with measurements and the exact positions where the deceased should stand during different parts of the ceremony. What makes these scrolls even more fascinating is that no two Books of the Dead are identical. Each was completely customized for its owner, with their name carefully inserted into every spell and specific chapters selected based on their social status, how they died, their occupation, and what the scribe thought they would need most in the afterlife. A warrior might get extra protection spells and detailed instructions for fighting demons, while a mother might receive special spells to reunite with her children in the next world and protect them from harm. A priest would get additional spells for communicating with gods, while a merchant might receive spells for ensuring his wealth followed him into eternity. The papyrus itself was made from the sacred papyrus plant that grew along the Nile River, and creating just one scroll required dozens of papyrus stems that had to be harvested at the perfect time of year, then carefully cut, pressed, and dried in the Egyptian sun for exactly 40 days. The process was so complex that master papyrus makers guarded their secrets jealously, passing them down only to their sons and most trusted apprentices. The most expensive scrolls used inks mixed with gold dust, silver powder, and precious stones like lapis lazuli that had to be imported from thousands of miles away, making each scroll worth more than most people's houses. The gold ink was believed to make the words literally glow with divine light in the darkness of the tomb, helping the deceased read the spells even in complete darkness. The Book of the Dead contains some of the most powerful magic formulas ever written, designed to give the dead person extraordinary abilities in the afterlife that would make modern superheroes jealous and demons tremble with fear. These weren't just hopeful prayers or comforting words. The ancient Egyptians believed these spells granted real, measurable powers that could be tested and proven. The text provides the power of transformation through specific spells that allow the deceased to shapeshift into various animals and divine beings whenever danger approaches. Spell 76 lets them become a golden falcon with wings that shine like the sun, allowing them to soar above the lakes of fire in the underworld and scout for dangers ahead. The transformation is so complete that the person gains not just the falcon's appearance but also its keen eyesight that can spot demons from miles away and its incredible speed that lets it outfly even the swiftest underworld monsters. Spell 81 transforms them into a lotus flower that blooms fresh every morning at dawn, symbolizing daily rebirth and renewal. But this isn't just symbolic. The lotus transformation allows the soul to regenerate any damage taken during their journey through the underworld, healing wounds inflicted by demons and restoring energy lost in battles with monsters. The lotus form also makes the soul nearly invisible to evil spirits, who see only an innocent flower rather than a traveling soul. Spell 87 turns them into a serpent that can slither through the tightest passages, hide in shadows, and even become venomous when threatened by underworld creatures. The serpent form is particularly powerful because it grants the ability to shed skin like snakes do, literally leaving behind any curses or spiritual contamination picked up during the journey. There are dozens more transformation spells, becoming a heron to wade through the poisonous swamps of the underworld, turning into a crocodile to navigate the rivers of the dead, or transforming into a scarab beetle that can burrow through solid rock to escape pursuing demons. Each transformation spell includes detailed instructions on how to trigger the change, how long it lasts, and what specific abilities it grants. Some spells even allow for partial transformations, growing eagle wings without changing the entire body, or gaining the strength of a lion while keeping human intelligence. Most importantly, the book grants the power of speech and memory after death, which might not sound exciting until you realize that most dead people lose both almost immediately upon dying. The ancient Egyptians believed that death caused a kind of spiritual amnesia that made souls forget who they were, where they came from, and even how to speak or think clearly. Spell 38 ensures the deceased keeps their ability to speak clearly and defend themselves before the gods, while Spell 91 preserves their memories and personality intact. Without these crucial spells, the soul would become a mindless shadow, unable to remember their own name, recognize their family members, or speak up when accused of crimes they didn't commit. The ancient Egyptians were terrified of this fate worse than death itself, becoming a forgotten ghost wandering aimlessly through eternity, slowly fading away until nothing remained. The book also grants the power of perfect recall, allowing the deceased to remember every good deed they performed in life when questioned by the judges of the dead. This is crucial because the afterlife judgment involves detailed interrogation about the person's entire life, including small acts of kindness that they might have forgotten. Spell 104 specifically gives the power to remember every time the person helped someone in need, every offering they made to the gods, and every moment when they chose to do right instead of wrong. The text provides protection against the second death, which was complete destruction of the soul, not just dying, but being erased from existence entirely, as if the person had never been born. Through specific defensive spells like the ones found in chapter 149, the deceased could create protective barriers against demons, survive being thrown into lakes of molten metal, and navigate past massive serpentine monsters with teeth-like swords that sought to devour wandering souls. Spell 125 was particularly powerful because it created an invisible shield around the soul that demons couldn't penetrate, no matter how powerful they were. This shield would automatically activate whenever the soul was in mortal danger, deflecting attacks from monsters and protecting against the various tortures that awaited sinful souls. Perhaps most remarkably, the book grants knowledge of secret passwords and hidden names required to pass through the afterlife's many locked gates and guarded chambers. The underworld was like a massive fortress with hundreds of doors, each one guarded by a different demon or god who demanded the correct password before allowing passage. These weren't simple words like please or thank you. They were complex magical formulas that had to be pronounced exactly right, with the correct tone and rhythm, or the guardian would attack immediately. Without these divine words, even the most virtuous soul would be trapped forever in the space between life and death, slowly fading away into nothingness while watching other souls pass by into paradise. The passwords were incredibly specific and often changed based on the time of day, the phase of the moon, and even the deceased person's birthday. Some gates required the soul to solve riddles, while others demanded payment in the form of magical energy or precious offerings. The Book of the Dead contained all of these requirements, updated regularly by the priests who maintained contact with the spirit world. The 42 assessors, who were divine judges of the dead, could only be satisfied through the precise recitation of the negative confession found in chapter 125. This required the deceased to look each judge in the eye and declare their innocence of specific sins while addressing each judge by their secret name, names like Swallower of Shades, Crusher of Bones, Eater of Blood, and He who dances in blood, that strike fear even today. Getting even one name wrong meant immediate condemnation to eternal torture, so scribes spent years memorizing these names and practicing their pronunciation. Beyond its literal instructions for afterlife navigation, the Book of the Dead represents humanity's most sophisticated psychological and spiritual framework for confronting mortality and transformation, serving as an ancient roadmap for what modern psychologists would recognize as the deepest levels of human consciousness. The text functions as an ancient guide to what Carl Jung would later call individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the psyche to achieve psychological wholeness and spiritual completion. But the Egyptians understood this process thousands of years before modern psychology even existed, encoding their wisdom in symbols and stories that speak directly to the unconscious mind. The journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, mirrors our own inner journey through the unconscious mind, where we must face our shadows, fears, and repressed aspects that we've spent our entire lives trying to avoid or deny. Each demon and monster the deceased encounters in the afterlife represents a different aspect of the human psyche that must be acknowledged, confronted, and ultimately integrated rather than destroyed. The serpent demons represent our primitive survival instincts and sexual desires that civilization teaches us to suppress. The fire lakes symbolize the burning anger and rage that we carry from past hurts and disappointments. The knife-wielding guardians represent our critical inner voice that constantly judges and attacks our self-worth. The famous weighing of the heart scene represents the ultimate confrontation with truth, not just moral truth, but psychological truth about who we really are beneath all our masks and pretenses. The heart, considered the seat of conscience, memory, and emotional truth in Egyptian medicine, is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, which represents not just divine justice but perfect balance and harmony. This isn't merely about moral judgment in the way modern religions often portray it, but about achieving perfect balance between all aspects of human nature, light and dark, masculine and feminine, rational and emotional, individual and collective. The scale itself is incredibly symbolic, representing the constant balancing act that defines human existence. We're always weighing competing desires, values, and responsibilities, trying to find the perfect equilibrium that allows us to live authentically without causing harm to ourselves or others. The feather of Ma'at is particularly significant because feathers are incredibly light yet complex structures, requiring perfect balance and symmetry to allow flight. This suggests that true spiritual evolution requires not the elimination of our so-called negative traits, but their perfect integration and balance with our positive qualities. The various transformations described in the text symbolize the soul's flexibility and adaptability, the ability to become whatever is needed to survive and grow in any situation. This reflects the Egyptian understanding that identity is not fixed or permanent, but fluid and capable of divine evolution. The falcon transformation represents our ability to rise above earthly concerns and see the bigger picture. The lotus transformation symbolizes our capacity for renewal and rebirth, even after being buried in the mud of difficult experiences. The serpent transformation represents our ability to shed old skins of outdated beliefs and behaviors, emerging renewed and more powerful. But the Book of the Dead also contains profound warnings about the dangers of spiritual bypassing and the illusion that magical formulas alone can guarantee salvation or transformation. The text makes absolutely clear that knowledge without genuine transformation is not just powerless, but actually dangerous. The spells only work for those who have truly internalized their meaning and lived according to Ma'at during their earthly existence. This ancient wisdom recognizes what modern spiritual seekers often forget, that reading about spiritual truths or even having mystical experiences means nothing if we don't integrate those insights into how we actually live our daily lives. The 42 negative confessions represent a comprehensive moral and psychological inventory that goes far beyond simple religious commandments. These confessions address not just major sins like murder and theft, but subtle psychological and spiritual failings like harboring resentment, gossiping about others, being proud or arrogant, wasting food, or causing others to weep. This suggests that spiritual evolution requires attention to the smallest details of how we interact with the world and other people. The confessions also reveal the Egyptian understanding that sin is not just about breaking divine laws, but about creating imbalance and disharmony in the cosmic order. The journey through the afterlife ultimately represents the process of dying to our false self and being reborn as our true spiritual nature. This death and rebirth cycle is something we can experience multiple times during our earthly life, not just at physical death. Every major life transition, spiritual awakening, or psychological breakthrough involves a kind of death of our old way of being and the birth of a new, more evolved version of ourselves. The Egyptian Book of the Dead has profoundly influenced modern horror, fantasy, and science fiction, most notably in films like the Mummy franchise, but also in works like Neil Gaiman's American Gods, Rick Riordan's Kane Chronicles, and countless horror narratives that explore ancient curses and forbidden knowledge. However, most modern interpretations completely miss the point of what this ancient text actually represents, transforming a guide to spiritual liberation into a source of supernatural terror and evil magic. In the Mummy films, particularly the 1999 version starring Brendan Fraser, the Book of the Dead is portrayed as a dangerous grimoire capable of raising the dead and unleashing ancient curses upon the modern world. The movie presents the book as bound in human skin with gold clasps, requiring a special key to open, and warns that reading from it aloud will bring catastrophic consequences. This Hollywood interpretation fundamentally misunderstands the text's true purpose entirely. The real Book of the Dead wasn't meant to bring the dead back to life in their physical bodies, but to ensure they could properly transition to the afterlife and achieve spiritual transformation. It's actually a book of spiritual liberation and enlightenment, not resurrection and revenge. The film's setup presents the book as forbidden knowledge that should never be read aloud, playing on our modern fears of ancient powers beyond human understanding and our anxiety about meddling with forces we can't control. The movie suggests that ancient wisdom is inherently dangerous and that some knowledge should remain buried and forgotten. However, this creates a fascinating parallel to the original text's warnings about the consequences of attempting spiritual transformation without proper preparation, genuine understanding, or pure intentions. The ancient Egyptians understood that spiritual power without moral development is indeed dangerous, but not because it releases external demons, because it reveals and amplifies the demons that already exist within us. The narrative explores themes that the ancient Egyptians understood deeply, that death is not an ending but a transformation, and that this transformation requires both knowledge and moral purity to succeed. The movie's portrayal of Imhotep's curse reflects the Book of the Dead's teaching that those who attempt to cheat death or gain power through impure means will face terrible consequences. Imhotep's resurrection as a vengeful mummy represents what happens when someone tries to use spiritual knowledge for selfish purposes rather than genuine evolution. He becomes not immortal in the true sense, but trapped in a state between life and death, consumed by the very desires that led him to seek power in the first place. What's particularly compelling about modern interpretations is how they often focus on the book's supposed power to grant immortality, a desire that speaks directly to our contemporary anxieties about mortality and our deep disconnection from natural cycles of death and rebirth. Modern Western culture has become obsessed with avoiding death at all costs, extending life through medical technology and preserving youth through cosmetic procedures. This reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what the ancient Egyptians meant by eternal life. They weren't trying to avoid death or extend physical existence indefinitely. They were seeking to transform death into a doorway to higher consciousness and spiritual evolution. The horror elements in modern media actually preserve an important aspect of the original text, the recognition that engaging with death and transformation is genuinely dangerous spiritual work that requires tremendous respect, careful preparation, and absolutely pure intention. The ancient Egyptians spent their entire lives preparing for death, not because they were obsessed with morbidity, but because they understood that consciousness continues after physical death, and that the quality of that continuation depends entirely on the spiritual and moral development achieved during earthly life. Modern interpretations often portray the afterlife as a realm of punishment and torture, reflecting our contemporary religious obsessions with judgment and damnation. But the Egyptian afterlife was primarily a realm of opportunity and continued growth, where souls could achieve even greater spiritual development than was possible during physical existence. The punishments described in the Book of the Dead were not eternal torture chambers like the Christian concept of hell, but temporary purification processes designed to burn away spiritual impurities so the soul could continue evolving. Contemporary horror stories about ancient curses often feature archaeologists or treasure hunters who suffer terrible fates after disturbing Egyptian tombs or artifacts. This reflects a modern Western guilt about colonialism and cultural appropriation, as well as anxiety about the consequences of treating sacred objects as mere curiosities or valuable commodities. The real curse isn't supernatural vengeance from angry spirits, but the spiritual emptiness that results from approaching sacred wisdom with materialistic rather than spiritual motivations. Video games like Assassin's Creed Origins and various fantasy role-playing games have popularized Egyptian mythology and magic, often portraying the Book of the Dead as a powerful magical artifact that grants special abilities to those who possess it. While these interpretations are more respectful of the original spiritual context than horror movies, they still tend to externalize what was originally understood as an internal psychological and spiritual process. The powers described in the Book of the Dead aren't magical abilities that can be gained by possessing the right book or artifact. They're spiritual capacities that must be developed through years of moral development, spiritual practice, and psychological integration. The enduring fascination with Egyptian death magic in modern culture reveals our deep hunger for meaning and transcendence in an increasingly materialistic world. We're drawn to these ancient symbols and stories because they promise that death is not the end, that consciousness survives physical dissolution, and that individual existence has cosmic significance. However, our modern interpretations often focus on the dramatic external elements while missing the profound internal transformation that these texts were actually designed to facilitate. As we conclude our exploration of this ancient masterpiece, we must recognize that the Egyptian Book of the Dead addresses humanity's most fundamental challenge, our terror of death, and our deep longing for continuity beyond physical existence, issues that remain just as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago in the shadow of the pyramids. This remarkable text represents more than just historical curiosity or museum artifacts gathering dust behind glass cases. It's a sophisticated psychological and spiritual technology designed to help human consciousness navigate its greatest transition and most profound transformation. In our modern world, where death has been sanitized, hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes, and rarely discussed openly in polite conversation, this ancient text reminds us that contemplating mortality isn't morbid or unhealthy. It's absolutely essential for living authentically and making the most of our precious time in physical form. The Egyptians understood something we've largely forgotten in our youth-obsessed, death-denying culture: that preparation for death is actually preparation for life itself, because acknowledging our mortality gives weight and meaning to every moment we have. By facing our mortality directly and honestly, rather than distracting ourselves with endless entertainment and material pursuits, and by developing our spiritual faculties while still embodied in physical form, we can approach death not as a terrifying ending or failure of medical science, but as the ultimate adventure of consciousness and the final graduation from earthly school. The Book of the Dead teaches us that death is not a wall that stops everything, but a doorway that opens into vast new possibilities for growth and exploration. Perhaps most profoundly, this ancient wisdom reveals that transformation always requires a kind of death, the death of old identities that no longer serve us, limiting beliefs that keep us small and afraid, and psychological patterns that prevent us from becoming our highest selves. In this deeper sense, we don't have to wait for physical death to begin our journey through the afterlife and start experiencing spiritual rebirth. We can begin that sacred transformation right here, right now, in this very moment, by choosing to release what keeps us trapped and embracing what calls us toward growth and evolution. The Book of the Dead ultimately teaches us that consciousness is far more resilient, creative, and eternal than our materialistic culture would have us believe, and that every human being carries within themselves the seeds of divinity and the potential for infinite development. If you found yourself drawn into these ancient mysteries and want to continue exploring the hidden wisdom that our ancestors spent lifetimes preserving for future generations, make sure to subscribe to Sigil Sanctum.